Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of RiesKitchen. Today we're doing something a little different. For the first time ever, we're going back and revisiting a recipe, an absolute family favourite, hot cross buns. The reason we're going back is I've learnt some new tips along the way, enough to redo the whole episode. I hope you're all going to enjoy these. It does look like a lot of ingredients, but it's really not too many. And after all, there's nothing like one straight out of the oven. So let's get straight into it, shall we? So first up, what we have is some bread mix flour, some milk and brown sugar, some sultanas, currants and dried cranberries or craisins, some fresh nutmeg, mixed peel, cinnamon, ginger and allspice, some white vinegar, an egg and vegetable oil, dried yeast and salt flakes. Then for the crosses, some plain flour, and for the glaze, some cinnamon and more brown sugar. Now the first new tip, and of course it's one of those things and you go, that makes so much sense, is to soak your fruit. I always soak my fruit for my Christmas cake. I'd just never done it with hot cross buns. So I'm just going to put 3 or 4 dessert spoons of warm water onto our dried fruit here. And just give it a stir. And this needs to sit for a good half hour or so, but that's how long it's going to take to get everything else ready in time for the fruit. And this will help improve our crumb because then the fruit is not drawing all the moisture out of our dough and it won't be so crumbly. Obvious when you think about it, just hadn't thought about it before. When I'm teaching my cooking classes, I often say that cooking is just chemistry that you can eat. And this is going to be one of those examples. I've recently learned that yeast is best at between 40 and 45 degrees Celsius. That's when it starts to activate. And so using cool or room temperature milk isn't going to get us the activated yeast as quickly as we would like. So we're going to warm it up in the microwave to 40 to 45. But first I'm going to add a little bit of brown sugar from our mix and just stir that in. It'll dissolve as the milk heats up. So in my microwave, it's going to take about a minute and a half, but I'm just going to zap it for a minute first and then check it with my temperature probe. Now that's only at 37, so it's not far off. So we're at 46. So I'll just stir that a little bit and just let it cool down. So now I'm down to 43, so right in my range, and I'm going to sprinkle on my yeast and just give it a gentle stir. Now don't be too impatient. We need to wait until this froths up, and that can be depending on your humidity, all sorts of timings, probably about 5 minutes though. So that's now been just on 5 minutes. You can smell the yeasting, you can see the bubbling on the top, but importantly, what I have is a layer that you can see of bubble, almost looks like a crumpet dough along the side. And that tells me that this is activated and ready to use, which is fantastic. Now, while of course you can make these in a bowl with a wooden spoon and a whole lot of elbow grease, a dough hook in a stand mixer makes this job a lot easier. So first in, we put our flour. And the rest of our sugar. Our spices. And then our nutmeg. And give it a quick burst just to mix that all through. The third thing that I've learned in doing some more baking is that white vinegar helps make the environment more acidic, and yeast thrives in that environment. So adding a little bit of vinegar into the mix improves the rising nature of the yeast as well. So I'm just going to beat my egg a little bit. And then I'm going to add the egg, the vinegar and the vegetable oil and just give that a little bit of a mix. Now where vinegar is the helper of yeast, salt is the enemy. So I'm just going to pop our salt in and give it a good mix through. And make a well into the centre of our flour and pour in all of that lusciousness. And just on low, otherwise it'll flare up everywhere. I'm just going to mix this now. It's going to take 3, maybe 5 minutes to just get it all incorporated together. I'm just going to give that a little bit of a help with my scraper, I think. Now that's quite smooth but a little shaggy looking, for want of a better term. I'm just going to do one more scrape down. If you're doing this by hand, this is the point where you'd be taking it out of the bowl and kneading it to get it nice and smooth. So I'm just going to make sure I've got all my flour incorporated in there. So I'm now going to have it on medium again for another 3 minutes just to do all that kneading to get it nice and smooth for me. So that's looking lovely and smooth now. And you can just see the way it's sitting on my dough hook there. It's just beautiful, soft, smooth, pliable dough. So we're ready now to add our fruit into our dough, but first I need to drain it. So I'll just show you how much liquid. And I'm going to pop my fruit out on some paper towel. And pat it dry. We don't want to add the water into our dough. So I'm going to add our fruit in and the peel. You could, of course, just zest in an orange now if you wanted, but of course I'm a traditionalist. I like the peel. And now just on low, because I don't want to crush the fruit, I just want to have it put through quite evenly into our dough. So the next step is to get our buns into shape. Now the tray that you're going to use is going to determine what your next step is. I know that I'm going to make 8 buns out of this mix and they're going to fit into my slice tray. And I quite like using my slice tray because of the slight depth, especially with gluten-free. It's going to help them prove up and not out. The bigger the tray you have, the more likely they are to become quite blobby rather than nice and high. And we want them to come up as high as we can. So because I've got my slice tray, I'm going to be able to get 2 rows of 4 in here. And then as they prove and enlarge, they're going to be forced to rise up. So that means I need to measure them into 8 equal spots or equal portions. So I have my electric scales here with just a piece of cling film or Glad wrap on it. I'm just going to spray it with just a little bit of oil to stop my mix sticking to it. And now I'm going to put my dough on because I want to measure how much it is to then be able to divide it by 8. So today's batch has come out at 1,074 grams, which divided by 8, by the magic of science, I know that's 134 grams each one. So I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on my hands just to make it easier to deal with the dough. And now I just need to cut that into 8. But you can see it's fairly evenly distributed, it's not too bad. It's a bit small. Now, a handy little tip I learnt off watching a YouTube video was to oil my hands up a bit more again, and then get each ball and just roll them under your hand, and you actually get a great shape. Just pop them in my tin. Now here's where the magic of chemistry really happens, and it's called proving, and it's when the buns will do the most of their rising. They rise a little bit in the oven when you cook them, but not really. This is the time when we're activating the yeast. Now, Easter time in Australia is autumn, and so we are in dry, hot weather. So traditionally, I would have gotten my piece of oiled Glad wrap, I would have put it over, and I would have put them in a nice warm place and tried to get some humidity up, and they'd take about an hour, sometimes an hour and a half to double in size. Underproving is your enemy. It's a bit hard to overprove, but you want them to grow. And as you can see, the way I've got them in the tin, I've got them almost touching the sides. So what I'm going to try and do is teach them to go up. But recently, you may have noticed in my newer kitchen, I have updated my steam oven, and it has a proving function, and this is a game changer. This cuts my proving down to about half an hour. They will double in size in my steam oven, and then I'm able to convert it into a convection oven, and it adds that little burst of steam, so I don't have to put a tray of hot water in the oven to create that moist atmosphere to get the really good crust. It does it all in one hit. If you're not lucky enough to have one of these, you can still just cover these up, Glad wrap a tea towel just to keep it, to get that environment warm and moist going, and then pop it, not in the sun, but in somewhere nice and warm for an hour to an hour and a half to do their trick. But we're going in the steam oven. So cover them with the oiled cling wrap. Well, that is my steam oven saying that the half hour is over. And you can see that they filled out, puffed up, done all the right things. Just magnificent. I'm just going to put that back down for a sec. But first, because I'm going to use the same oven, I'm just going to start that going to heat up. So let that get started. Okay. So into our flour, I need to add just enough water to make it a thick enough consistency to be able to pipe. It's still a bit thick, so just a dash. That's better. So now I've pushed my plastic of my piping bag just into my nozzle. And so now it's just a matter of piping. I'll just bring that easy to reach. Piping across to form our crosses. So now these are ready to go into the oven. Now you pop them in at 200 for 5 minutes, and then drop the temperature down to 180 for 25 minutes to half an hour, depending on your oven. If you're using a normal oven, also pop a tray in there with some hot water, because that'll create the steam to make a lovely crust. But as I said, because I have a bread making function on this oven, I don't need to. It's going to keep the moisture and squirting going for me. So now with just a few minutes to go, my kitchen is starting to smell absolutely fabulous with them baking in the oven, and it's time to make the glaze. So into a small pot, I'm just going to add our sugar, some cinnamon, And I want about 50 mils of water, which is 3 tablespoons. I'll just turn all of that on, and I just want it on a low heat and just stir it until the sugar dissolves and it starts to bubble. Perfect timing, because here's my oven telling me that the buns are done. The last thing that we need now is our glaze. And so leave them in the tin to glaze them, or if you're going to put them on your rack first, put a piece of baking paper down underneath, because you will get glaze dripping. It just makes a mess on your bench. Using a pastry brush, generously apply the glaze to the buns. One more step, and it's always the hardest, and that is letting these cool down a little bit. You need to let them come down to room temperature. When they're cooler, a little bit cooler, we can pop them directly onto the rack, but we don't want to break them yet, because if they're too warm, they'll still be a bit doughy in the middle, and that's not the texture we're after. So, as always, the hardest part is in the waiting. Now, for all the details of today's recipe, don't forget to check out my blog at the link below. But as always, the best bit's in the eating. It's soft and fluffy. You can see the distribution of fruit, which is juicy and sweet, and that little bit of saltiness of the butter. This is just perfect all year round. Happy Easter, everybody. Till next time. Ciao.